Yes, lovely to be back with you and appreciate the opportunity. And as always, greetings from our church family in Ballycrocken. A few weeks ago, we looked at Psalm 1 and Psalm 2, those two orphan psalms. Orphan because there is no title to them. You might expect we'd go to Psalm 3, but we're not going to do that tonight. Instead, we're going to go to Psalm 139. Put it up on the screen. I hope you can see it. It's quite small writing. You can, if it's too small for you, just look at it in your own Bible or just listen to me as I read it through for you just now. Psalm 139 for the director of music, a Psalm of David. Here we go. There we go. I'm all fingers and thumbs. That's it. O Lord, you have searched me and you know me. You know when I sit and when I rise. You perceive my thoughts from afar. You discern my going out and my lying down. You are familiar with all my ways. Before a word is on my tongue, you, Lord, know it completely. You hem me in behind and before, and you lay your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me, too lofty for me to attain. Where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? If I go up to the heavens, you are there. If I make my bed in the depths, you are there. If I rise on the wings of the dawn, if I settle on the far side of the sea, even there your hand will guide me. Your right hand will hold me fast. If I say, surely the darkness will hide me and the light become night around me, even the darkness will not be dark to you. The night will shine like the day, for darkness is as light to you. For you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in the secret place, when I was woven together in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed body. All the days for me were written in your book before one of them came to be. How precious to me are your thoughts, God. How vast is the sum of them. Were I to count them, they would outnumber the grains of sand. When I awake, I am still with you. If only you, O God, would slay the wicked. Away from me, you who are bloodthirsty. They speak of you with evil intent. Your adversaries misuse your name. Do I not hate those who hate you, Lord, and abhor those who are in rebellion against you? I have nothing but hatred for them. I count them my enemies. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there is any offensive way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. This is a beautiful psalm. It's divided up very neatly into 4 stanzas, and each of the 4 stanzas have 6 verses. You ask yourself, what was going on in David's life when he wrote this psalm? What was it that inspired such beautiful poetry, such a beautiful song? We're not 100% sure what was happening in his life, but I think there are maybe some clues. In verse 19, towards the end, he refers to the wicked. He refers to bloodthirsty men. He talks about God's adversaries, which are really his adversaries. He's talking about men who hate God and hate David. So it seems there are men, perhaps in the royal court, perhaps within the palace itself, who hated David and hated David's God. Or it could be that he's referring to wicked men belonging to foreign powers who, as we saw in Psalm 2 a couple of weeks ago, were plotting in vain against God and against David, God's anointed. There's something sinister going on in the background, that's for sure. Whether it's wicked men nearby or wicked men far away, he's under pressure. They're plotting against him. And perhaps David is asking the question, where is God in all of this? What are his plans and purposes in all of this? Why is God allowing this to happen in David's life? And as he thinks about these men and their wickedness and their viciousness, and as he thinks about himself as God's anointed king, as he tries to make sense of all that's happening, his thoughts, as they so often do in the book of Psalms, turn to God. And out of that context, there flows this amazing poem, which has become so very precious to countless Christians down through the centuries. I would imagine that maybe for some of you, this might even be your favorite psalm, Psalm 139. It's very precious to us. So what does he teach us about God as he thinks about God? Well, there are 4 stanzas, as I mentioned at the beginning, and really in each of the stanzas, there's a lesson about God and a lesson about some aspect of God's character. Let's go through it together. In the opening stanza, which is verses 1 to 6, David teaches us about God's ever-perceiving mind. We would often refer to it theologically as omniscience. Omni just means all, and science means knowledge. God's omniscience, his omniscience. He is all-knowing. He is ever-perceiving. He's the God who has searched me, and he knows me. When I sit down or when I stand up, even when I think, God perceives my thoughts. He knows when I go out of the house. He knows when I lie down in my bed. He is familiar with all my ways, even before I speak. The Lord knows that word that's going to come from the tip of my tongue. He knows it completely. He really does hem me in front and behind. His providence, if you like, hems me in. I can't escape him. He lays his hand upon me. And as you read those very famous words, very poetic words, you see that God's knowledge of us is both intensive and extensive. He's familiar with all my ways, all my ways. Now, some people find that a threat. There are many people who would be scared at the thought of God knowing everything about me. Some people try to dig their heads in the sand and just try not to think about that God knows me through and through. He knows my thoughts and my words and my actions, everything. That can be frightening for many people. But For David here, obviously it's not a threat in any way. In fact, it's the very opposite. It's a blessing. It's a source of great comfort. In fact, we see that very clearly in verse 6, the last verse of the stanza. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me, too lofty for me to attain. And I think he's breaking forth there in worship and in adoration and in praise. If I mention the name Eric Lindsay to you, you will immediately think of the Eric Lindsay from Rotary Park / Bethany. But I'm actually thinking tonight of a different Eric Lindsay. In fact, Eric, the other Eric, is someone who passed away just a few years ago, very suddenly and unexpectedly. He was an elder for many years in Great Victoria Street Baptist Church. And Eric was also a teacher in Bethany. In fact, I met him there about 25 years ago or so when I did the PGCE at Queen's after I left Bible College. And my placement was in, one of my placements was in Bethany. I got to know Eric then, and we struck up a friendship. And he was a great help and encouragement to me down through my different pastorates, and I do miss him terribly. He was a good friend and a very godly man. Eric, whenever he prayed, whether it was in the pulpit in Great Vic, or maybe he would do a visiting pulpit supply, or whether he was praying with you just personally one-to-one, he would often do that. Eric would always say this little phrase as he opened his prayers. It was his kind of wee mantra. You know the way we all have our own little mantras in our prayers. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that at all. And Eric used to say this almost every time he prayed: Father, I want to thank you that you know, you understand, and you care. Now, as you can see tonight, I've never forgotten that. And that has stayed with me, although Eric is in glory now. That simple little way of addressing God the Father. Lord, you know, you understand, and you care. And those are three great things about our loving Heavenly Father. And this is what David is getting at as he begins this beautiful psalm. God is ever perceiving. And that is not a threat to us. We have faith in this loving Father. And the knowledge that he knows everything about us is a great comfort to us. He knows, he understands, and he cares. And for those of us online tonight, or for others in the Bethany church family, just as in Ballycrochan, there will be people who, over the past year, now it's hard to believe it's a full year, have been feeling very, very lonely and isolated. And isn't it great to know that our loving Father, he knows, he understands, and he cares. That's the first stanza. God is ever perceiving. And then the second stanza from verses 7 to 12, God is ever present. And so from omniscience, that is all knowledge, we turn now to omnipresence. He is all present. David, in this little section, conducts what I think is a thought experiment. Is there any place devoid of God's presence? Where can I go from your Spirit, capital S, the Holy Spirit? Where can I go? Where can I flee from your presence? Is there anywhere where God is not? And his thought, he allows his imagination to run riot. If I go up to the heavens, the highest place, you're there. If I make my bed in the depths, in the deepest place, you're down there as well. If I rise on the wings of the dawn, if I settle on the far side of the sea, even there your hand will guide me, your right hand will hold me fast. Surely the darkness will hide me from the presence of God. No, not even darkness. So the highest place, the lowest place, the furthest place, the darkest place. When David asks the questions, where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? This is not, as some people would suggest, this is not angry frustration that David somehow and in some way is trying to get away from God. He's not doing a Jonah here. I think it's quite the reverse. He's taking comfort, again, just like the first stanza, with the omniscience of God, now with the omnipresence of God. He's taking great comfort from the fact that there are no no-go areas for God. I think that's really important for us. And that has great relevance for lockdown this past year. We're hoping and praying that over the next couple, 3 months, that we'll be in a much, much better place than we have been, and that life will become a wee bit more normal. But it's going to be a journey still, and we still don't know exactly what is going to happen. It's great to know, it's comforting to know that wherever we are, the Lord is there. I've only been able to be with my dad once in a full year. It was Christmas Eve, and Andrew and Louise and I were able to get in and just for a few moments give him our presence at a distance. And I know that for so many people, I'm sure it's the same with many folk tonight online, you haven't been able to be with your loved ones. You've only been able to see them perhaps through a window. You've just been able to wave, as we have done to Dad at Bramblewood, just wave through the window or give a thumbs up, and Dad will give a thumbs up back, and that's it. And that has been hard. That's been really hard. Hard for us, hard for him. And as a Christian, I take great comfort in knowing that in Dad's own room and in the lounge where he sits during the day and when he's in getting his meal, that the Lord is there with Dad all the time, every moment of every day. There are no no-go areas for God. The Lord is with us always, wherever we are, whatever the place, whatever the circumstance. A few weeks ago, our campaigners, Intersol Crafts, had a Zoom Q&A with me. They asked me to come and answer some questions. I had about 10 questions, and I was quite taken aback by how deep and how difficult the questions were. I was so pleased to be given the questions prior. Otherwise, I don't know what I would have said to some of the questions. And one of the young guys asked, is God in hell? Is God in hell? I thought, well, that's a cracker question, isn't it? What a question that is. And the idea behind his question was, well, God is omnipresent. So if he's everywhere, is he in hell? And I had to do some head scratching. I wonder how you would answer that question. I immediately thought of a number of quotations from the late R.C. Sproul. The R.C. is someone He passed away about 3 years ago, and his ministry has had a tremendous impact on me over the last lot of years. Um, he said these three things about hell. Number one, the sinner's problem with hell is not the absence of God, but the presence of God. The sinner's problem with hell is not the absence of God, but the presence of God. He said, secondly, the worst thing about hell is the presence of God there. And the third thing he said was God's graciousness is not totally removed from any individual during this lifetime. In hell, it is. God is omnipresent. He is everywhere. He is everywhere. Corrie ten Boom is a heroine of the Christian faith. Her writings about her life and her faith, especially during the Second World War, are legendary. And in the most inhumane conditions, she and her sister Betsy and some others would gather around a small fire each night and read the Bible. This was in Ravensbrück concentration camp during the Second World War. One night when Corrie and Betsy and the others were around that fire, they read the words of Paul in Romans 8, who shall separate us from the love of Christ? Shall trouble or distress or persecution or famine or nakedness or peril or sword? No, in all these things, we are more than conquerors through him who loved us. Corrie wrote these words. I would look around us as Betsy read, watching the light from the fire leap from face to face. More than conquerors. More than conquerors was not a wish. It was a fact. We knew it. We experienced it minute by minute. Poor, hated, hungry. We are more than conquerors in Ravensbrück took place on two separate levels, mutually impossible. One, the observable external life grew every day more horrible. The other level, the life we lived with God, grew daily better, truth upon truth, glory upon glory. A few weeks ago, there was World Holocaust Day. I've always had a fascination over the years with the Holocaust. Do you know, I still can't get my head around what happened all those years ago. The evil in our world, the inhumanity. And inhumanity sounds such a sane word. We're lost for words as we watch those pictures and see those documentaries. Still find it so hard to believe. Somebody, a survivor from one of the camps, asked the question a few weeks ago on World Holocaust Day in their very old age. It's a question that's been repeated umpteen times. It's a question that I fully understand. Where was God? Where was God in Auschwitz? Where was God in Ravensbrück? You see, for Corrie ten Boom and her sister Betsy and her wee friends around that fire, God was there. God was there with them and in them and for them. He is ever perceiving. He is ever present. And then thirdly, he is ever powerful. And from omniscience to omnipresence we now come to omnipotence. Again, omni, all, potence, power. And this third stanza, verses 13, 18. He begins in verse 13 to talk about creation. Now, God's omnipotence is seen at its best in creation. In 2014, I had a sabbatical and had 3 months off from my ministry in Antrim. And for 3 of those weeks, I traveled out to California to stay with a friend that had gone through Bible college with. And during those 3 months, or 3 weeks rather, I had the great privilege of traveling to some places that I'd always wanted to go to. Yosemite. Yosemite is absolutely stunning in its beauty. And when we were up at Glacier Point, overlooking the whole of Yosemite, as it were, a busload of South Koreans appeared, and a big crowd of them came and stood at Glacier Point. The view, I've never really seen a view quite like it. And in Korean, they started to sing "How Great Thou Art." I took a video of it, and I tell you, it was something. It really was something special. I was taken up to Lake Tahoe, and again, just so beautiful. I was taken to San Francisco Bay, and the view of the bay from up behind the Golden Gate Bridge. You know, I could try to describe it for you, but you would really have to see it for yourself. It's something else. And one of the members of the church took me on a day trip up to see the sequoia trees, the redwoods. When he suggested it, I thought, well, we're going to see trees. I mean, it's not really a day out, is it? But I tell you, I had to eat my words, because when we got there, you think you've seen trees until you've seen the redwoods, the giant redwoods, the biggest living things on planet Earth. It's just, words fail me as I would try to describe these trees to you. When David speaks about God's creation, he turns to the greatest creation of God, and it's not a mountain range. It's a human being. A human being is the greatest act of creation in the whole of God's universe. And I just wonder, is David asking himself, if ever there was a time when I was hidden from God, maybe, just maybe, it was when I was in my mother's womb, when I was smaller than a grain of rice. How could something so small and tiny and seemingly insignificant be of interest to God? David had never seen an ultrasound scan, but he's intrigued at the thought of how tiny he was. And yet, even when he was there, being created, microscopically small, he was of great, great value to God. The all-powerful, the omnipotent God of creation made me. He made me. I just want to remind you of the personal pronouns here. of the unborn. These verses are of great relevance to the current and ongoing debate about abortion. And we've been praying for our legislators, our MLAs up at Stormont, and we think of a bill that's coming at the moment, and we're praying for a reversal from a decision made last year over and above the heads of our representatives in Northern Ireland. Look at the personal pronouns. For you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in the secret place, when I was woven together. Your eye saw my unformed body, all the days ordained for me, for me. After I became a Christian, I spent a number of summers up in Ballymoney with Stephen and Gail on the by teams. And there was a girl on our by teams who had spina bifida. And she and I did the door-to-door work together in the afternoons. She was absolutely brilliant at it. She could have a conversation with anybody, and she could have a conversation with anybody about the Lord. And these verses were her favorite verses in the whole of the Bible. You created my inmost being. And it's that little phrase, all the days ordained for me were written in your book. That was her favorite phrase in the whole of Scripture. David is quite simply blown away at the omnipotent God creating him in his mother's womb. Verse 17, how precious to me are your thoughts, O God. How vast is the sum of them. Were I to count them, they would outnumber the grains of sand. When I awake, I am still with you. The omnipotent God who made me, is with me and knows everything about me every day. George Matheson was a famous Scottish minister and hymn writer. He wrote the great hymn, O Love That Will Not Let Me Go. He wrote that hymn on the eve of his sister's wedding. His whole family had gone to the wedding and had left him behind. He writes of something which had happened to him that caused him immense mental anguish years earlier. He had been engaged to be married until his fiancée learned that he was going blind, and there was nothing the doctors could do for George. And so she told him that she couldn't go through life with a husband who would be blind. He went blind while he was studying for the ministry, and his sister had been the one who had taken care of him all down through the years. The Lord had blessed George Matheson's ministry, even as a blind minister. He preached in a church regularly to over 1,500 people, Sunday by Sunday. But he was only able to carry out his duties as a pastor, as a preacher, because of the care of his sister. Now she was getting married, was leaving home, and who will care for George now? Not only that, but his sister's marriage brought a fresh reminder of the awful heartache that he had experienced years earlier when he was jilted by his fiancée. And it was in the midst of this intense sadness that he wrote, O Love That Will Not Let Me Go. He says that he wrote it in 5 minutes. It's amazing how some of the best songs ever have been written in a few minutes. How could George Matheson maintain hope in the midst of dreadful circumstances? And his hymn gives us the clue. O joy that seekest me through pain, I cannot close my heart to thee. I trace the rainbow in the rain and feel the promise is not vain. That morn shall tearless be. George trusted in the promises of a God who is all perceiving, ever present, and all powerful. That brings us now to the end, and it's the final stanza, and it comes as a terrible shock, and it seems so out of kilter with the rest of the psalm. If only you would slay the wicked, away from me, you who are bloodthirsty. They speak of you, Lord, with evil intent. Your adversaries misuse your name. Do I not hate those who hate you, Lord, and abhor those who are in rebellion against you? I've nothing but hatred for them. I count them my enemies. Now, where on earth does this come from? It just doesn't seem to fit with the rest of the psalm. I remember many years ago in Antrim preaching one Sunday night on this psalm, and I stopped and I asked the congregation. Sunday nights in Antrim, we had quite a small congregation in the sort of a church room rather than in the main church. So it was quite informal. And I asked them, what do you make of this? Where is love your enemies? Nobody could answer. And I wasn't too sure how I was going to answer. There was a visiting speaker that night who was he was in Antrim simply because he was getting a flight at Aldergrove just shortly after the meeting. So he popped in. So I asked him, what do you make of this? And he was able to give a great answer. He said, you've got to remember that these are the words of King David, not just David, but King David, the king of God's people, God's nation. He was God's king, God's representative. And these wicked men, these bloodthirsty men, were a threat, not just to David, but to the nation that God had planted. God's name was being abused and opposed, and David feels very defensive of God, so he stands up for God. And you've got to see David in that light. I want you to notice that David is not looking for specks in the eyes of others like his enemies and ignoring the possibility of a plank in his own eye. I think that's why he finishes by saying, search me, O God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts, and see if there's any wicked way, any offensive way in me, and lead me in your way, the everlasting way. What's he teaching us here? He's reminding us that God is ever pure, ever holy. And this is one attribute of God that is really forgotten and overlooked today. I mentioned R.C. Sproul earlier. Sproul wrote a book on the holiness of God, and it was his main claim that the holiness of God is the most important attribute of all, because everything else about God is holy. His love is holy. Everything about God is holy. So our time is gone. His knowledge of us is inexhaustible. His presence with us is utterly dependable. His power over us and in us and around us is indestructible. And he is always, always, always pure and holy. I'm so thankful, like David, I'm sure you are too. I'm so thankful that the God of Psalm 139 is my God and my Saviour, and He's the perfect God for lockdown and for all that is to follow. Thanks for your time tonight. Thanks for listening, and God bless.